There's a prophecy in the Bible that foretold the history of world empires more than 2,600 years ago. Hi, I'm Ken LeBrun, and this is Faith Points. Come along with me as we explore the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. We're going to start with something Jesus said about Bible prophecy in John chapter 14 and verse 29. He said, "And now I have told you before it come to pass, that when it is come to pass, ye might believe." So Bible prophecy actually has a predictive element to it. Jesus says, I tell you before it come to pass, so that when it happens, you'll believe. In Matthew chapter 24, and verse 15, he specifically mentions the prophecies of Daniel. Matthew 24:15, he says, "But when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." So he's referring to the prophecy of Daniel. He's referring to Daniel as a prophet. And he's saying that we are to understand Daniel's prophecies. When we read them, we are to understand them. So with that little bit of introduction, let's go to Daniel chapter 2 and look at this prophecy that foretold the history of world empires long before they ever came on the scene. In Daniel chapter 2, we are in Babylon in the around the year 603 BC, I believe it was. 603 BC, Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. And one night he had a dream, a very significant dream. And he woke up in the morning and he knew that he had dreamt something that was very important, but he couldn't remember what it was. And try as he might, he could not recall that dream. Well, he had a staff of wise men who were supposed to be able to do anything. So he calls all the wise men in and he says, "Okay, tell me what I dreamt. And more than that, I want you to tell me, what did it mean?" He knew that there was something important about that dream that required interpretation. And so he wanted to know, what did the dream signify? And so he asked the wise men, "First of all, tell me, what did I dream?" And they said, "Well, we can't do that. We aren't able to tell you what you dreamt in the night. Tell us what you dreamt, and then we'll tell you what it means." And he says, "No, you guys are just a bunch of fakes if you can't tell me what I dreamt." And so the king made a decree that all the wise men in Babylon should be killed. Well, the prophet Daniel and his 3 friends were among those wise men. Of course, they weren't in that interview with the king at the time, but they found out about it. And so Daniel goes into the king and he says, "Please give me time and we will tell you what you dreamt and what it means." So the king granted him time, and he went back to his house and he gathered his 3 friends and they knelt down and they had a prayer meeting. And they asked God to tell them what it was that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamt in the night and what it meant. And during the night, the dream was given to Daniel. And he was shown exactly what it was that the king dreamt. And so in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 20, Daniel says this wonderful prayer. He said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him." What Daniel is saying here is that God is in charge of human events. He removes kings, he sets up kings, and he knows the future. He knows what's going to happen. So he thanks God and he praises him. And then he goes back see the king and he says, "I can tell you what the dream was that you had and what it means." But he says, "It's not me that can do this for you." He says in verse 28, "But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. And he's the one that maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Now there's our first clue as to what the dream was all about. It said, he maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. In other words, this dream was to tell the future, what would come in the future. And then he goes on and he says, thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter? And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. So the dream was to show what would come to pass in the future. Now he's going to tell him what it was that he dreamt. Verse 31 of Daniel chapter 2. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. So, he told him the dream. Great image. Different metals representing the different parts of this image. So now he's going to explain what it is. Verse 37. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So, Daniel is saying to Nebuchadnezzar, you and your kingdom is what this head of gold represents. Then he says in verse 39, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another, a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So here he tells us that these different portions of the image in his dream would represent successive kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom of Babylon was represented by the head of gold, and then after his kingdom was gone away, another kingdom would come, and it was inferior to his. And then a third kingdom of brass would rule over all the earth. So we need to find out what were these kingdoms that came after Babylon. So to do that, we will go to Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5 is the story of the last king of Babylon, Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar made a feast one day, it says here, unto his gods. And he took the sacred vessels that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem, and he brought out those vessels and used those vessels to drink to his gods, to Belshazzar's pagan deities. And so it was a very blasphemous party that he had with all of his important people. In the middle of the party, there was a hand that appeared out of nowhere and started writing on the plaster of the wall. And this is what it said. It said, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And of course the king was all shaken, and of course he didn't understand what was the significance of this writing. Calls in all of the the wise men of his kingdom, and they're not able to tell him what it means. And so then the queen mother says, there's a man here who was able to interpret dreams for King Nebuchadnezzar. Bring him in. So they brought in Daniel. And Daniel comes in and he tells the king what it was that the hand wrote and what it meant. And I'm reading in Daniel chapter 5, verse 26. This is the interpretation of the thing, meaning, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tikal, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Well, that's exactly what happened. It says that very night, verse 30, Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans was slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom. So, that tells us what kingdom it was that took over the kingdom of Babylon when Babylon fell. It fell to the Medes and Persians, verse 28. So the Medes and Persians would be that second kingdom represented by the silver portion of the image in Daniel chapter 2. So what would then the third be? What would take over after Medo-Persia? Well, for that we need to go to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, it says, In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, and northward, and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Okay, a vision, a ram, and then a goat. So what does it mean? We go to verse 20. Daniel chapter 8, verse 20. The angel explains to Daniel exactly what these symbols mean. He says, The ram, which thou sawest, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So there we know what kingdom it would be that would take over after Medo-Persia. It would be the kingdom of Grecia. Under Alexander the Great, he would be represented by that great horn between the eyes of the goat. So we have 3 kingdoms so far. We've got Babylon, we've got Medo-Persia, and then we have Greece, represented by the head of gold, the breast and arms of silver, and the belly and thigh of brass. So those are the first 3 kingdoms. Now we got to go back to Daniel chapter 2. And we'll look at verse 40. Daniel 2 verse 40. It says, And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. So the fourth kingdom, represented by the iron legs of this image, would be a fourth kingdom. It would be strong as iron. Now, the Bible doesn't mention exactly what king came after the kingdom of Greece, but we know from history that it was the Roman Empire that conquered Greece, or the Greek kingdoms. And so Rome would be this fourth kingdom, strong as iron. And then it says in verse 41, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay." So this fourth kingdom, Rome, would not be conquered by another world empire like the previous ones had been. It says there that the kingdom shall be divided. So Rome, it was predicted that Rome would be divided. Well, that's exactly what happened. In 395, when the Emperor Theodosius died, he was the last emperor to rule the entire territory of the previous Roman Empire. When he died, he divided the empire into two halves just before his death, and gave the eastern half to one of his sons and the western half to the other one of his sons. So that from then on, after 395 AD, from that point on, the empire was divided. But then a further division took place in the Western Empire, because what happened is the various barbarian tribes came in and started infiltrating into the empire. They didn't conquer the empire and overthrow it, but what they did was they came in and they became a part of it until they became the ruling part, basically. And in 476, the last Western emperor was deposed. And so there really was no Western Roman Empire at that time. From that point on, it was these various Germanic groups that had come in, these little kingdoms, which now are the kingdoms of Europe. That's where the various nations of Europe came from, was from the dividing of the Roman Empire. And so it says, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." So, try as they might, these various nations would never be able to come together as a single country. They could not weld themselves together into one nation. And so today we still have all the various nations of Europe as separate sovereign nations, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Then we come to Daniel 2, verse 44. And it says, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure." So, verse 44, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom." Wow. That's the next world empire. God's kingdom. The Bible tells us that God is going to enter this world's history in a way that is going to do away with all the kingdoms of the world. And God's everlasting kingdom will be set up. And that's what was represented by that stone that came and struck the feet of that image. And all of those kingdoms turned to powder and blew away with the wind. That stone kingdom, the kingdom of God, is the kingdom that I want to be a part of. It's the kingdom that is soon to be set up, according to Bible prophecy. And it says in verse 45 that the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof is sure. I love the Bible for its prophecy, for its inspiring stories, and for its practical counsel on Christian living, which, by the way, we have a video on if you haven't seen it. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll let you go, and we'll see you in the next one.